good evening, everyone. I suppose more people will be joining us on the way. So how about I will just slowly start to introduce the topic of the seminar and our today's speakers. So welcome to another seminar that is dedicated to crisis documentation and which is part of the project 24th February 2022, 5 a.m. Testimonies from the War. The title of today's seminar is Whether, When and How, Disclosing Sensitive Data in Emergency Research and Documentation Projects. And today we're going to tackle upon questions such as when is actually the right moment to disclose the data concerning conflicts that are still ongoing or political situations that are still very tense, and who actually should decide whether or when this data should be disclosed. Are they researchers, maybe some ethical bodies, or maybe the funding agencies, because very often they will demand some tangible results from the researchers. And of course, there are very different expectations and interests involved. And today we are going to discuss this topic in the context of mainly interviews recorded in Poland and Ukraine, but also the broader context for this topic is the case of Belarus, where the repressions towards the opposition are still taking place. And now let me introduce our speakers today, and let's start with Iryna Kashtalian, who's a historian from Belarus. She graduated from the Belarusian State University in Minsk in 2001, and in 2011 she founded the Belarusian Archive of Oral History together with her colleagues. And since December 2021, she works as a visiting scholar at the University of Bremen. Her main research interests are the Second World War and the Holocaust in the occupied Soviet Union, the post-war history of the Soviet post-war history, Soviet repressions, history of the everyday life, the oral history research. She's the author of the monograph, The Repressive Factors of USSR's Internal Policy and Everyday Life of Belarusian Society, published in Wiesbaden in 2016. And Iryna is also the author of didactic materials on Minsk Ghetto and different groups for victims. And her current research project is political emigration from Belarus since 1996. Our next speaker will be Natalia Otrishchenko. Natalia is a research fellow at the Center for Urban History in Lviv, and she holds a PhD in sociology with a focus on methodology and methods of sociological research from the Institute of Sociology at the International Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And since March 2022, Natalia leads the Ukrainian team within 24th February 2022, 5 a.m. International Documentation Initiative. In 2022 to 23, she was a Fulbright visiting scholar at the Sociology Department of Columbia University. And during March 2023, she's staying at Potsdam as a visiting scholar. And finally, Anna Wylegała is our third speaker today. Anna is a sociologist and assistant professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences. She is the author of 2 monographs, Displaced Memories, Remembering and Forgetting in Post-War Poland and Ukraine, published in 2015, and Wybór nie ma dworu, Reforma rolna w Polsce, published in 2001, and the co-editor with Małgorzata Łukianow of The Burden of the Past, History and Identity in Contemporary Ukraine, published in 2022, and also she's the coordinator of the Testimonies from the War project in Poland. So, hello again, and welcome to our today meeting. And let's start with your initiatives. And this very basic question about conditions under which your initiatives were born, and how did you manage to determine the moment when you should actually launch your project. And perhaps with this, we could start with Iryna.
Oh, complicated question, because I want to say about my directions. So both of them you mentioned. Thank you firstly for invitation to this seminars, to this event, and very pleasant that I can also report about Belarusian side, because the main question of this event, possibly from Belarusian perspective, will be a little bit another answer. But I will try to give a little bit insight in this. And what I wanted to mention, what influenced me, it's Belarusian Oral History Archive. It existed since 2011, and more than 1,600 interviews were collected. And now, after huge scale of repression, we have a big question of ethical responsibility of what is access to our data and our interviews, when it could be misused by representatives of dictatorship, and it can lead to negative consequences to mention and involved. And for example, since arrest in 2021, but it was released, but still it was like trigger. The head of Belarusian Oral History Archive, Andrei Mastika, with his wife, for this work for archive. Also, we decided to close from public our archive, because it was too big responsibility. From the other side, in general, it's question to reflect in general on oral history situation in Belarus, and what is the future when you cannot provide oral history researchers in Belarusian side, and what you can do outside. And second, my project is connected with this outside so-called activities, because I also a political refugee now, and escaped at the end of 2021. And because of my expertise, I understood that I can do something connected with oral history, and propose to work with group, which is certainly underestimated through a regime, and it's important to document their memories. And since the end of 2021, I collected interviews. And in this situation, I still continue with usage of all oral history tools. Possibly later I will tell about dilemmas, which is a question of discussion for today, not to tell now, but in general to say situation is changing when we compare collecting interviews, and it's really more hard with the time to collect them, because people have less hope and more fears. Also, I think, and I don't know, it's interesting for me how it could be in Ukrainian society to see that this also old traumas from Stalinism, from Nazism, they also influence today's with today's situation, and it can make a deeper problem. And that's why it's not possible to give a voice and a face for our stories, but it's about anonymous interviews with quite difficult access. But in later questions, I can tell about it more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Iryna, for this complex introduction, not only to your project, but this very broad context of conducting research in Belarus in general. So perhaps we could move now to Natalia Otrishchenko. If you could say a bit about your initiative, your research project, actually our research project too, because I am myself the part of the Polish team conducting this project in Poland. But tell us about the Ukrainian part of this project. How and when did it start? When was the right moment, and what were the conditions under which it started? Okay, and could you please unmute yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Goshu. And such often like the same mistake, not muting yourself and unmuting. It's such a pleasure to be in this company, and I'm happy to see so many familiar names in the list of participants. So I hope that we will have a really rich discussion with the questions which do not have one possible answer. And this discussion is a very difficult one because it also tells us a lot about the need to adjust, a need to react, need to be flexible, and even though we can find a solution, do not stick with it and be ready to review certain best practices, which you might think to be the best practice in that exact moment. But at the same time, the situation can easily change, and it implies a lot of imagination and courage to accept that some decision might be wrong and something need to be adjusted and changed. I might start with a quote by Iryna. Thank you for saying that. So it's easy to collect stories when you have hope. I think it's a powerful statement because it implies a certain vision of the future. And when you have a full-scale war and when all the established procedures collapsed, your past is challenged, but your future is also challenged because it's something which is really endangered during the full-scale invasion. Last year in February, we all were shocked, and shock and collapse are probably the words that I might use here and unpack a little bit, because they tell you a lot about how unstable your position is, and you need to react somehow, and you need to rely on something. And we were happy and lucky to have internet connection and to have electricity, to stay connected with other colleagues, together to imagine the future and think about the way how we can react as professionals and what we can propose, what could be the solution, which would have two different temporalities. And temporality is another thing that I would like to propose you to think about. When you are in the situation of the immediate challenge, you have to react here and now and think about what is ethical and correct to do in the moment of unfolding violence and possible traumatic experiences and challenges to your basic existence. But at the same time, by claiming back the future, but giving hope to yourself, but also to others, you are somehow building bridges to desired future. And also the way how we imagine the project, it has the human agency in its core. And we saw it as the way how empowerment of either specific people who share their stories, but also community in general in the future might happen when we collect the stories, and when in this future, victorious future of Ukraine, we can work with this archive. Now we are almost 19 months in the full-scale war, and we have no idea when and how it will end, but we had some responsibilities towards ourselves that we took when we launched the project, when we started the collecting of testimonies with the idea that we have to respect the decision of a person to participate in the story, but also not to end our relationship with other storytellers on the moment when the story is recorded. And I think during the next round, I will unfold a little bit on the idea of how we can have really participatory project when participants of our initiative are not reduced to the set of quotes or to the narratives or to the data, but when they can have a voice in the way how these stories are preserved. It's a very complicated and challenging issue, how we can develop it on the level of archiving, Because when we have oral history interview or in-depth interview, we have this very gentle and emotionally engaging relationship with one person. But when we have 150 interviews, or when we have 200 interviews and 200 different types of relationship that we have to maintain somehow, how we can deal with this challenge, the challenge of scaling. And if we think about the growth of the collection, because with every person with whom we conducted interview last year, and we started in mid-March 2022, answering the question when. And I think the answer really depends on the geography where you are, and also on the institutional setting where you are participant. And all of these architectures and bodies and institutions which you have to adjust to when you launch a project. We started in March 2022 because we are a privately funded institution, the Center for Urban History. But at the same time, we had support from our colleagues from outside of Ukraine, who became our so-called ethical committee, with whom together we discussed certain steps when and how we can start. Furthermore, we also included on the level of design of methodology, people who had similar experiences, people who are themselves internally displaced. Therefore, we wanted to attune our methodological decisions to the experiences of people whose voices we would like to record. Therefore, we tried to have this participatory design as much as it was possible under the full-scale invasion. At the same time, it's also about the certain long-lasting outcomes of the decisions that we made. We promised a second meeting to every person with whom we conducted interview last year. We finished in September 2022, and the formula that we used when we invited people for this possible future meeting was that we are ready to talk when the hot phase of the war is over. We are still in the hot phase, I assume, but it's also a question of definition, and I think it will be my last point during the first round, how we define that certain thing is over, how we define the end of event, how we define the right moment to start, to stop, and to disclose, and to have a second meeting. So this temporality is also very, very vivid and present, but at the same time, it's all about decisions and the way how we justify them for ourselves, but also for the audiences to whom we have certain responsibility.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalia, for introducing us to the core of the project, and also for this important reminder that to what a great extent oral history research is also about relationships and maintaining them as well. So thank you very much. And now, Anno, if you could say a few words about the Polish initiative and the conditions under which it started.
Yeah, thank you, Gosiu. Thank you, Natalia and Iryna for your introductory comments. Well, I think that first and foremost, the key difference between what we are doing in Poland and in Ukraine is that in Ukraine, the colleagues are having the full-scale war in their own country, but they are working with their own citizens. In Poland, we are close, we are safe and sound, but we are working with foreign citizens, which means that from one side, we are in a safer position when it concerns the data gathering. From another side, we need to be even more sensitive and we need to pay even more consideration to the way we will disclose the testimonies that we are gathering. And in March 2022, when we started the project, we joined the initiative started by Natalia and by colleagues in the Center for Urban History. I think that we somehow all thought and hoped that the war will be over soon, and that was the basis for many decisions and many assumptions that formed our methodology and also that formed our attitude to the data gathering and to the development of the project in Poland also. So I think that this is why we started our project in Poland in the emergency scam, which means that we at least in the beginning, we had no funding, and we focus on the data gathering and not really on the longer perspective. We had this feeling that this is this precious, quite short moment, short period, short window of time when we should really focus on the gathering of the data, on the recording of the testimonies, and then we'll have plenty of time for the more deliberative thinking about the archiving, about the disclosing procedures, and so on. And this is also why we approved all the ethical commission's recommendations, for example, not to transfer the data to Ukraine until the war is over, which is quite questionable now, because there is this question when the war will be over, who decides what does it mean that the war is over. And also at the very beginning, we decided that probably we will archive the interviews in the academic data repository, which is costless. And I'd like to remind you that we were starting the initiative, the project, without any stable funding. So that was the solution to start. So the data repository is costless, but it works according to the in-out scheme, which means that basically you can limit the access, but in the end, you upload the data and the user is downloading the data. In September 2023, we have 220 interviews recorded in Poland, ready to be archived. But the war is not over, and the discussion, what will it mean that it's over, or what will it mean that it's safe enough to transfer the data, to disclose the data, is just happening. And we are facing right now many problematic issues concerning the data sharing, disclosing, and opening. And in fact, all these problematic issues could come down to, I would say, contradictory expectations. Contradictory expectations of many actors in the field of our own project. We are the actors, researchers, other researchers are the actors, sponsors are the actors, interviewees are the actors, our own societies are the actors. And I think that I will talk more about these dilemmas, problems, and contradictory expectations in the second round of questions.
Thank you very much for introducing this Polish part of the project. And we are not going to discuss the process of data collection during today's seminar so much. And dear guests, you're of course invited to look into other recordings of our seminars when this issue has been discussed, when we talked about methodologies and ethics, and then we discussed for the Polish project the first 100 interviews we collected. Today we are going to talk about the problematic issues that Anna and the rest of the speakers talked about. So disclosing the data, as all of you mentioned, there are certain political conditions, social conditions. There are certain rules and in the academic field and outside academic field. So on the one hand, we all want to make the recordings, the testimonies as safe as possible. But on the other hand, we would like them to be heard. We would like others to listen and to also access these testimonies and what the witnesses are actually talking about. But this comes with many questions. This comes with many obstacles, with rules from different stakeholders, with some expectations from academics, from the society, and from other, we could say, groups of interest. So how can we deal with that? How can we somehow come to terms with all of these expectations, and how actually it looks from your perspective, from the perspective of your of your experience, of your work, and today's perspective as well. And now I'm back to Iryna. If you could say how it looks from your perspective, or still looks actually from your perspective.
Thank you. I must say that firstly, when we are collecting interviews, we understand that owners of interviews are themselves eyewitnesses. So it means what will happen to these interviews much depends on what is allowed for us. And when we are talking about Belarusian oral history archive, where majority of interviews were collected before 2020, we got total control so to open it for the public, and now it's our ethical decision to close. In situation of collection, which I'm doing now, it's another thing. And as I told you, and connect to what Natalia and Anna said, that we do not have end of the event. Even if I collecting abroad, people have relatives who can be in revenge of regime, so persecuted. And at the beginning, from the talk with our eyewitnesses, I always say that also for research interesting to come twice, and now we are fixing so-called facts or more details, and then we will see with the time reflection. And also my idea was that possibly till this time situation will change, and they can send me additional paper, because in comparison with Belarusian Oral History Archive, in my present interviews, I'm signing appears that only transcript can be allowed for work of other researchers. I found a repository in Center for Eastern European Studies at the University of Bremen, so-called Forschungsstelle Osteuropa. Somebody of you possibly knows this place, connected with archive of dissidents and also present situation, and also there are
Ja ci zaraz dam, kurwa, złodziej. Ja ci, kurwa, dam złodziej. Co ty za pierdoło opowiadasz? Co ja, kurwa, kradnę?
Can you close this person who is...
Yeah.
Natalio, możesz tego pana wyrzucić?
Już to zrobiłam, tylko
Okay.
mi zajęło
Tak, dziękuję ci
zidentyfikowanie
bardzo.
go.
Okay, so
Thank you.
sorry everyone, it seems that we had some unexpected guests or some visit during our seminar, so sorry for this little turbulence, please.
Yeah, but it's remembered me, for example, situations that, for example, also in Germany, have attacks to our groups of diaspora from, I don't know, security services of Russia or Belarus. So simply always to be prepared for attacks. And it's also a question for me what I'm usually not here, but for example, in internet saying, also in thinking if I will not harm somebody with too open information. And that was good example, practical example. Yeah, so but returning to FSO, yeah, I put here collection and also transcripts, and only on the place people whom I will give permission will have this access to transcripts where are no names, places, and other markers that could reveal the name of the witness and theoretically harm this person. And it's certainly very, very so-called in frames, in perspective, I don't know, possibly when it will be allowed to make a possibility of searching such transcripts, at least as in area of metadata, but it's really a problem for the future when we can open it. And from my side, it's firstly to get this permission from people, because feeling of fear is individual. And one person can allow, and other not, and we must respect this wish. And that's why, okay, people want to make their research, but it's nothing compared with security of people. So yeah, it's really challenging. And also for us to think that we first of all collecting for the future for research, but not to solve other problems. As for example, somebody asked me if I'm collecting interviews for justice. Yeah, so because people are reporting about crimes. I'm always saying that secure conversation can be only in situation when person knows why it was made and what will happen in the future.
Okay, thank you, Iryna, for this this comment. And I think you touched upon issues that I would like to get back to, probably as a question to the rest of our participants, such as families of the witnesses. So just to remember that it's not only the witnesses themselves that we try to protect, but there are so many other people involved that we need to take into account, and also status of transcripts and metadata for the future archives. So if there's time later, I would love to get back to this. And now let's move to Natalia with our main topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not only families, but all the third-party information that you might get in the interview, even though you might have an agreement from a person to disclose all of the materials, but at the same time, the neighbor, the friends, the bystanders, some of the names and last names of people or addresses, everything which is considered by GDPR personal data, what to do with all of that materials. And I will start maybe from afar, from this inherent tension that we have in this type of a project. So on one hand, we have the idea that we are giving voices to people, and these stories are preserved for the future, and people are sharing because they wanted to be heard. They wanted to be part of this larger story that we are telling about the events that we are living through. But at the same time, when we disclose this material, they start to live in the present. And that's why it's a very real security and safety issues to the person who shared the testimony, but also to the families, the third parties, and all of these different assemblage of relationships that we hold as social beings. So what to do with this inherent tension? So one answer is actually to have everything anonymized and strip the data from all of its richness and fullness, and therefore also stripped people of their names, which is an act of violence, I believe, especially for those who wanted to be heard with their own names. On the other level, you can disclose the data fully, and therefore have the challenges of both use and foremost misuse of this data. So not only asking about who is using materials, but who might misuse them and for what reasons, not only like the challenge of authoritarian state as in case of Belarusian archive, but also the challenges from other states, like from Russian security forces, for instance, which is in case of Ukraine could be a real threat, especially when it comes to materials related to volunteers or to people who join the armed resistance. So what to do with this challenge? And one of the possible answers, which is extremely resource consuming and time consuming, is to engage in this elaborative conversation and collaborative decision making together with people who share their testimonies. On one hand, it's our task to deliver as much as possible information about the challenges of certain type of information being disclosed, and not to decide for them that something should be removed, but to think together about the way how to develop a procedure which could be sensitive enough to individual cases, but also which could be, as a procedure preassumes, possible to scale to different cases. So how to deal with it when we have, in our case, 150 interviews, in your case, more than 200 interviews, extremely resourceful work. And it's a big challenge for me, and as a possible decision, which I find at the way to continue as a discussion, is that we have this responsibility for a second meeting with our storytellers. And before the second meeting, which will be either the moment when the hot phase of the war is over, or maybe in the near future, because we don't know how long this war will last, to have the second meeting and a discussion about the first one during the second meeting. Somehow to save the resources for 2 meetings and discuss the certain content of the first interview. Not to review the whole conversation, because it will be really resourceful work, but rather think about the potential list of sensitive data. And it's part of the discussion that we have now, how to define sensitivity. And the answer for me is that it's very relational concept, because sensitivity really depends on like certain types of relation that the person has, and also in terms of relation to the situation on the front line in our case, because some areas which were occupied last year in September are now liberated. And therefore, probably it is less sensitive to disclose certain type of information about Kharkiv region or Chernihiv region. At the same time, the front line might move. Therefore, we have to be really aware about certain developments, and therefore we can learn a lot from our colleagues from Belarus, how to adjust to certain challenges and how to think ahead about the way how we can potentially think about the procedure of removing access somehow. And as I mentioned during the first round, have to think flexibly, and have to be ready to react really, really fast when something is challenging, something is going on the front line, which can somehow harm our narrators. Yeah, I think I will stop here. And yeah, once again, it's about sharing responsibility. It's not about us taking all of the responsibility or placing all of the responsibility to our narrators who decide. And I'm sorry for focusing too much on these 2 parties. I'm not touching upon funding bodies, because we also started pro bono and we do not have like a stable funding body in our Ukrainian team to whom we have to report with this project. Therefore, we have a bit different situation. So for me, it's the key relationship is between us and our narrators. And then later, when we will have archive, we will have another party coming, the researchers or people who are interested audiences. And I think we can talk a little bit about that later.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this is something to really keep in mind what you mentioned, that this very simple act of anonymization, I mean, not simple, but let's say that looking at anonymization as a solution is also an act of symbolic violence on testimonies, that depriving someone of their name is a highly controversial procedure. And talking about funding bodies and grants and so on, let me move to Anna right now to share her Polish perspective on this.
Yeah, I think that I think that our Polish team does share most of the concerns that Natalia just discussed. Those which concern the responsibility for the data, the willingness to share this responsibility with the narrators, and the, let's say, the lack of interest in this mechanical anonymization, which would spare us of well, everything valuable in this project. But as Gosia mentioned, we have another actor in the field, and these are our sponsors, because although we started this project as emergency documentary initiative, later we received the funding and we have simply some obligations, and we need to provide the results. And this is the key factor that is different in case of Poland and Ukraine right now. And of course, we will negotiate with the sponsors, and I think they might be a little bit more flexible than they claimed at the beginning. But anyway, we probably will need to have something out by January 2044. which means that it's going to be tricky because, as Natalia said, in the field we have interviewees. Some want to see their testimonies out under their names, and they did stress during the interview that they want to have their name present and preserved in the archive. And sometimes they are approaching us right now and asking, so where's the interview? I gave the testimony so that it's going to be heard by the wider public. Some other interviews want to postpone the disclosure of their testimonies because of the war. In fact, we somehow want to see these testimonies out because this is what we recorded them for, to bring the message to the wider public and not to keep them for us, for the not really clearly defined future. And unlike in the case of Ukrainian team, we do have researchers who are already in the field and they are approaching us and asking about possibility of using our interviews. So far, we allowed for this exceptional access only 3 times. But these are also researchers from Ukraine, which also, I think, makes the entire dilemma even more problematic, because why we researchers from Poland should deny the access to the interviews, to the testimonies of Ukrainian citizens, to the Ukrainian researchers. This is very problematic. But I would say that in the whole situation, the safety of the data and the safety of the interviewees and their families, as Natalia mentioned and Iryna mentioned, is our priority. So I would say that in terms of practicalities, of course, the on-site access would be the best option for now, but it's not possible. For logistical and financial reasons, it's simply not possible. It will be possible in the 3 years perspective when we work with these interviews and archive them within the new funding that we received together with the Luxembourgish team and in cooperation with the Ukrainian team. So in 3 years, we have the perspective of the really responsible and safe of working of the other way around. So within 3 years, we should be able to offer the wider public and the researchers a possibility of accessing these interviews safely and responsibly, but it will be in 3 years. And now we have all these expectations or these obligations. So what we need to do is to take some provisional decisions and to get prepared for some, I don't know, a phase of transition that will lead us to this final way of disclosure. And what we decided for now is that since we cannot close the collection for the 3 years period or until the war is over, we will try to limit the access and to limit the sample, which means that the access via the platform that we will choose will be not manual, but will be not automatic, but manual. And in practice, it means that a person that wants to access the interviews needs to ask us individually and explain why, what for, who this person is. And we also decided to limit this access to for research, education, and exhibitional purposes, which means that if you don't have affiliation, if you cannot provide us with personal data and recommendation letters, you will not get the access. And we will also go through this process of selection of the sensitive data, as Natalia mentioned. So we will only disclose the testimonies of people who did not ask for any anonymity. And we will cross-check for sensitive data, and we will work the we will work out the catalog of this sensitive data within our team. We have already started the process, and I think that it will take some time until we agree on which war-related data is sensitive, which is not sensitive anymore, which kind of personal data is sensitive, which is not. And we will exclude all interviews of disputable status because we think that right now it's simply better to limit the sample than to put someone in danger. So, for example, we will when it concerns the testimonies that focus on the territories that were occupied, they will be all anonymized and only the transcripts will be disclosed. So I would say that what we are going to do is rather to discourage from using our collection for the near future than encourage, waiting until the proper solutions will be available for us, or until the war is over, hopefully.
Thank you very much. We spoke a lot about disclosing also for research purposes. And let me get back with this issue to Natalia and Iryna before we open the floor to the public. So just a little bit of housekeeping rules. So if you'd like to ask a question, please, you can either raise your hand and then you will be granted the floor, the virtual floor, of course, and or if you prefer to type your question in the chat, feel free to do so. If you could also indicate to which speaker or if this question is to all of the speakers. Before that, the one last question, something that Anna spoke about, and I would like to get back with this to Iryna and Natalia. So talking about the third-party access, so one of this third-party group is, of course, other researchers who are good-willed, interested, willing to critically analyze the testimonies. So probably in the future, how do you see the possible disclosure to other researchers? Under what conditions, under what rules, and how do you even see this being possible for prospective use? Iryna.
Yeah, first of all, my hope is also that war will over very quickly, and situation in Belarus much depends on this. Yeah, really, we wait victory of Ukraine very, very much, because without it, it's without hope. All our work, and which solutions can be found in situation when it will be longer. Difficult to imagine, for example, in a situation with Belarus, as I told, to make such barriers to understand who is person, how important this access to these sources for this person is, which goals of this person, that could lead that some of researchers can get this access. And it was very important what said Anna about this provement, because when, for example, for hype, one journalist will get access and nobody knows how it will be presented, and also misuse, who knows, somebody will tell that he's Ukrainian, but he will be from Russia, for example, from propaganda. How to deal with this? Because people trust us and give us interviews, and people have different opinions, and we do not have censorship. And to avoid this misuse in this sensitive time is very important responsibility for us. And that's why I think that anonymity is very helping. Also, as I told, example of my project, that transcript, so that also, I don't know, it's very difficult to change the voice. So and to peep places or names. So that's why text, it's certainly somehow to criticize, because it's interpretation when you change the transcript for these purposes, but the time is demanding. And everybody who is doing so in his project must have special document where he regulates this. Or for example, I have regulations how I quote name of the person. So I have quote where I put name, place and so on, but I do not inform people. So when I will print, it will be not direct citat, and it will be not name but quote. And I don't know if you will have such approach, but also for your research, firstly, to think what you can do to also connect it with sustainability of the project and what funders are waiting. They are also waiting not only interviews but product, but possibly these new approaches with metadata, and we saw it's during presentations from Luxembourg, for example, that can be done, and with anonymous representation, so-called, yeah, and it can bring something to research field. But for individuals, it's really to control who is it and why, and time is so that I don't know, for security, I cannot say national, but for security, it's important to control who has access to such data.
Okay, thank you, Iryna. Now I move with this question to Natalia.
Yeah, if I may start from some general observation and then zoom into
Go ahead.
Practical ones. So first, I think in Linda Tuchevej-Smith on decolonizing methodologies, there is a list of questions that every scholar has to give an honest answer. And among these questions, there are a few really subject-focused. Who will benefit from the project, who can access the results, and who can interpret. And those are these crucial questions about the larger outcomes of the projects, either focused on documentation or the research of a current war, Russian war in Ukraine. And another challenge, it is coined the term academic resourcification of Ukraine. The idea was first framed by Asa Bazdareva and then developed by Victoria Donovan, how Ukraine somehow becomes a space where all of these stories are generated, and then someone comes from the outside and give a fancy theoretical explanation of what is going on. So those are challenges that I'm thinking about, and this is also something that informs certain steps that we would like to make in this project. So zooming to some practicalities. From the very beginning, I was thinking about the way how to disclose this data, and the idea of having it as an on-site access point was for me the most productive way of thinking, because then you can really see who is working with this material. So you will have like a real person embodied and knowing who it is, and with all of this identification happening. But then I'm also thinking about the part of these materials which is less sensitive, everything that Anya described, the way how you can make it visible not only for people who come to Lviv or to any other location in Ukraine or outside Ukraine where these interviews are stored. So part of it might be available online after registration and after certain approval procedures, which we, I hope, will develop together. But once again, have to navigate between these levels of sensitivity. What is less sensitive and what is more sensitive? And Probably we will have a sample of interviews available online, maybe fully anonymized for this purpose. Therefore, other researchers and scholars or interested audiences can access these materials. But I also think that on-site access is a very promising idea. And as I'm also talking to my colleagues in Ukraine, because the field of documentation is far growing. And we are definitely not the only institution doing that. There are numerous different individual and institutional projects in Ukraine dealing with war documentation, partially also with the methods of interviewing, not only audio interviewing, but also video interviewing. And some of them already disclosed their data for different audiences, even without any restrictions and regulations. So we are operating in a certain field, and it's something that we also have to acknowledge. So, but at the same time, we want to develop a standard which is the best practice for us, and which we see as like the best possible solution for the situation where we are now, with this very straightforward safety and security challenges to people who shared their testimonies. So once again, I want the stories to live. I want to fulfill the promise that I made to my interview partners, to make it part of the larger discussion about the experience of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine and what does it mean for Ukrainian society, for people who were forced to leave their homes, who left their social environments, or who mobilized as volunteers. I think it is a very important set of sources for us to tell the story of the war fully. But at the same time, it's only part of the story, and I'm also acknowledging that. Yeah, we will think about next steps, and we will think about this next round of interviews, which I also see as an opportunity to review some of the choices that we made and maybe develop more inclusive and more caring procedures.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And Anna, you're raising your hands, basically.
Yeah, I want just briefly to jump in before we open the floor to the public, because I want to comment on what Natalka said. I'm really also from the team of the on-site access, because it's in any way it seems to be the safest one, the most responsible one, and the one that gives us the most control over the testimonies and over the material. But here is this difference again between your situations and our situation. I'm not talking here about the sponsors. I'm talking about who has the right to these testimonies. Of course, the interviewees have the right to these testimonies. The interviewers have some rights to these testimonies, but also the societies that are concerned. The Ukrainian society somehow has the right to these testimonies because they tell the story of the Ukrainian people. But also the Polish society somehow has the right to hear the stories because it tells the story of what happened to Poland as a neighbor of the state that was attacked and occupied. And just one example that shows how it is different in Poland. If we limit the access, if right now somehow we find the logistic and financial conditions and resources to develop this on-site access points in Poland, it would probably mean that some Ukrainian male researchers would not access these testimonies until the regulations that regulate their possibility of leaving Ukraine and going abroad is changed. So there are some tricky moments, and we indeed need to navigate between these moments.
Okay, thank you. And Iryna.
A little comment, because I was thinking about examples of on-site access, and for me it's quite a good example. Shore archive, if somebody worked from you, that's good oriented on universities, and there could be responsible person, and if we have digital sources, it's not so difficult possibly to do so in one place in Lviv or other place access for Ukraine, because people not all researchers can leave the country, especially males, yeah, and in Poland and so many in Luxembourg possibly, yeah, where representatives of team are, and it will be possibly not so difficult if you will find other oral history archives where it can be so-called as addition, if you will have such cooperation.
Okay, thank you. And Natalka, do you want to comment on?
Just a very, very short note, super short, that we are all relying on this post-war as a very important moment for us to review certain things. But post-war will rise another challenges. And I also encourage us to think about what the post-war means and what additional ethical and legal questions may arise when we step into the so desired moment of post-war and victory of Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for this comment. I think it's specifically interesting that I know all of us working on the topic of the post-war, but post-World War II. So having already maybe some thoughts about how the post-war reconstructions might go well or wrong. Okay, so thank you very much. Now let's open the floor for the questions, for the comments, and again, you can raise your hand to ask the question directly, or if you feel more comfortable with typing the question in the chat, just go ahead and write it. So. Any questions, any comments? So perhaps before they happen, because I assume they just need one more minute to get formulated, let me get back to one of the issues that
I think Katerina wanted to ask the question. Yeah.
Yes, do we? Oh, sorry, raise your hand like this. I'm sorry. Yes, Katerina, please.
I was trying to this technique. Okay, continue.
Go ahead.
Okay, comments or like contribution to what I have heard from you. The topic is sensitive data, and we have had a lot of different questions. It would be very helpful really to have all these questions written to understand that questions belongs to different stage of projects. And I think a special stage of project have to be analyzed specially, because to have the answer, we have really be very special focused on special question, on special period of our research. I will speak about sensitive data from different, in context of different stage. We will start with questionnaire. In questionnaire, we could have sensitive data, and what perhaps it would be better begin with the other point. I looked before our seminar. I have looked what we have about sensitive data in internet from other researchers group, and we if we will read definition what is sensitive data, we will have the answer, I think. And today, all what is around sensitive data is so strong regulated. I speak about European area, America, and other. It is really, we would be happy to be flexible, but the time now is so that it is not allowed to us be flexible with personal data and with sensitive data. We have so much law regulations, and we must, step number one, we must really understand that every context of research, Ukrainian law context, yes, Ukrainian law context, Poland law context, Luxembourg law context, can be different in attitude to sensible data. And the step number one, we must really close work with data officer or with personal, with people who do it really professional. In Luxembourg University, and I know in other universities, we have a big department who is responsible only to check what different law regulations. It is really, really not easy now to be flexible with data. We can present it in internet and with the best wishes to be open to society, but we can have a big problem with law. And it means, for me, for example, after researching that, I have found different information, history research, and sensitive data in Canadian context. People speak nowadays about law context when speak about sensitive data. It's very, very important point. To be prepared to this, we need a lawyer, we need closely work with people who is educated and in this context. It is number one, and about we have spoken about anonymization. We have it is in the stage documentation to archive. In archive, we really it is special question perhaps for special seminar how to prepare big data to archive. It is really a lot of question only to this stage. How can we prepare data to archive? And to speak about open this data, I think we are not prepared to this stage, because it is in 1 year we have so much different regulations about personal data. In 1 year, we can have so much different, unpredictable other situation. I would suggest to focus now how can we really good and safety document data to archive. And when we will do this really correct, then in the future, it will be easier. And I can speak more, but on one point,
Okay.
we have mentioned about anonymization, but in archive praxis, we have pseudonymization. And the different, I'm sure you know the difference between anonymization and pseudonymization, and is that anonymization, we put away absolutely a lot of personal information. When we're doing pseudonymization, with the help of special program, we can, in the separate space, really have all information what we had, but only really small group of people can have access to this information. But this information will not put away. And with special program, in medical field is very good used this program.
Katerina, do you have can we proceed to the question, because we also need to make space for the answers and other questions.
So I would say, I would suggest to think about pseudonymization like a solution, like solution to preserve sensible data or personal data. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. So now back to Iryna, Natalia, and Anna. Would you like to address some of these issues, or all of them?
I might start.
Natalia.
Oh, Natalia, okay, go on.
No, go ahead. I'll continue.
Okay, so I will just start with saying that of course we are aware of all this complicated legal issues that are behind, especially when the European funding is concerned. And this is, for example, the reason why in theory we can discuss transferring the data to Ukraine, but in practice we are not allowed. I mean, no ethical committee will allow for the transfer of the interviews recorded in Poland to Ukraine, no matter what we think about the moral rights of the Ukrainian society to these interviews. And if we want to function within the funding scheme, we need to obey the rules. So this is how it is. So Katerina, I think that unfortunately, we are aware of all these legal procedures. We don't have entire department of legal specialists working in our institutions, but nevertheless, we need to obey the same rules. So yes, I think that we are paying attention to that, and probably many things were simply simplified for the sake of this conversation. I think that while the difference between pseudonymization and anonymization is quite clear for all sociologists and people working with archiving of the qualitative data. So we might have been not really precise, but yeah, but we'll definitely consider the solutions.
Yeah, and I would also a little bit historicize and sociologically think about law as social construct. So we tend to think about it as like a very rigid structure, but think about GDPR like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. It was a completely different way to see this type of law. So the way how you see law and how you act upon law, I think it's also depends on the way what you see morally correct. And sometimes these things are like moving in parallel. I don't want to say that we have to like abandon the law. Of course not. We have certain legal regulation, but at the same time we have to think like about what is correct to the way how we promise something to our narrators, what I think is right to the community in a larger perspective, and not to hide beyond the law and saying that we cannot do something because it is written the way it is written. Law could be interpreted differently as well. And even within European Union, there are different ways how to proceed with it. So my very brief answer is that we have to adjust to all of these procedures, but at the same time, not to over legalize, if I may put like this, other projects. Because even in Ukraine, if we think about the law on personal data protection, it has different ways to work with it. If you are a scholar, if you are a journalist, if you are a person from law enforcement, so different fields might have different way to deal with it. And also, how do you position yourself within the field might also result on the way how you deal with certain legal challenges. We didn't want to medicalize our initiative at the very beginning and to use certain medical discourse when we started to record our testimonies. And I also don't want to over legalize it. Maybe there is other words to use it, because legalize could be differently read, but do not be so stick with certain ways and using the language the way it is used in a different field. Still, we are historians, we are social science, and the way we are motivated in our work might be a little bit different than some bureaucrats are motivated.
Okay, thank you, Natalia. Iryna?
And from me, a little bit comments. First, I thought about experience from Belarusian oral history archive. I understand that now you have possibility not to search for popularity of archive because founders understand, because in another way you can turn to problems of different perceptions of access to such sources, for example, what is concerning to Ukraine and what is concerning to Europe, and level of access with all legal things, so control of anonymization and so on could be sometimes too much for researchers who usually more easily have access, as I have from Belarus such experience with our archive, Belarusian Oral History Archive. We made from the beginning registration, and for people sometimes it was at least problem, yeah, what for I want to register it, what for it's so little, but there are researchers, but we are not in such position. But in any case, different wishes and waitings of researchers can bring misunderstanding possibly, and that's why regulations which must be written, certainly problem of sustainability, that Luxembourg has a lot of money, so we can, so I would say, if they have such a special department in this quite voluntary project, it's more difficult, but to use other examples, how it's regulated, not only with this period, but try to develop what is the best. It's, I think, quite good. I agree with Katerina that amount of processes between to document and to put in archive and then to make access, it's also quite huge. I remember from our archive at least 17 points, and I think that 8 were dedicated to documentation and other what is happening with documents before they will go to access for researchers. And it much depends on the system where documents will be saved. And I don't know on which stage are you, but to think for the future, which instruments to storage will be for a long time, because it's big investigation, and also to develop documents, how it could be organized, and that it will at least 10 years, maybe more long work without additional money, because it's always a question where to find a support for continuation. And I also wanted to say, possibly in addition to comment in chat, so about post-war, what will be in post-war, it's really, I am not planning so far because of my traumatic experience with events of 2020. We all thought that it will be quick, but it's not, and situation is more darker. So to think what will be after, it's necessary, but how far we can be there in these processes. And but if you will think, it's also about struggle between who will win and who will be losers, and if such archive could be misused because of different data to make revenge. I don't know. So like idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, indeed, we are discussing very different timeframes, like for the future, for after the war, for the post-war, and yes, they are very difficult actually to point clearly when the post-war would be, or when exactly. What futures are we talking about? Are we talking about disclosing 5 for 20 years as some archives operate, or let's say 50 years, and what the situation and the legal regimes and political regimes are going to look like. So thank you, Katarina, for your comments and your questions, for the answers. So do we have any more questions to our speakers? Then perhaps let me ask one more question. And this was something that Iryna mentioned, that was transcripts. And what is the status of the transcripts in this whole process of disclosing data? So are they a safer way to disclose testimonies, or are they actually more problematic? Should they be attached to the original file, or maybe only transcripts should be disclosed? How do you see this? What is the status of a transcript accompanying, or maybe not, interviews collected in emergency situation or under a difficult political situation?
I think ideally you have to link between the audio. In our case, we have a voice of a person recorded. We do not see the face of the one speaking. So ideally, I see it as audio file as primarily source for us. And in oral history, there is a consensus about that. And the transcript is something supplementary. But at the same time, in academia, so far, we are operating with text. And the text is the primarily thing for us. We produce text, we read text, we quote text. Maybe we will move to other forms of knowledge production when we will have different types of sharing information. Maybe in the future we will have like QR codes as part of the text, where you can directly link to the voice of a person and heard the story. Why not? And if you think about development of technology, it could be an option. But at the same time, like it's all about ideas. It's all about the way how we conceptualize. On the level of safety of data, definitely it's easier to edit transcript than audio file. And if we think about different levels, and I see it also as Katarina rightly pointed, like we can think about different stages and different levels. Depending on the decision that we made about sensitivity of data, we can disclose part of the material and hide the other one. And if something changed, we can also reframe it. But it all depends on, well, technology, of course. Will we have a certain software which will help us to do all of that? Will we have enough space, digital space? Even though we think about the digital space as a cloud space, still it is a very hardware story. So you need to preserve it somewhere. So also in terms of hardware, in terms of software, in terms of the way how overall our academic knowledge production will look like in 10 years or in 50 years, there might be different options. But once again, I think Steve Naron already left our meeting, but once he told us during some internal seminars that we had within our initiative, that people who shared their testimonies from the Holocaust did not foresee the possibilities of internet, how these stories might live online. And I think similarly now, we can think about possible developments, but at the same time, we cannot foresee how the war will develop, how the post-war will develop, and how the technology will develop. What will be possible for us to do with these stories in like 50 years. And also the questions that Steve asked us about the slippery concept of a post-war, when we will have other parties joining the discussion. The friends and relatives and kids of people who shared the testimonies might also have a claim about the way how the stories are preserved. So what would be possible tools to engage them, also to make their voices heard? And should we think now about this challenge, somehow incorporated in our discussion with other narrators, or we can assume that the generation will come next and they will do with these challenges, not us.
Yes, thank you for this comment. I think it's fascinating to discuss, can you inherit a testimony perhaps, or who has the right to inherit someone else's story. So yes, I think this is the problem that sooner or later many projects, many archives will be facing, or maybe are facing already right now. Anna, you're raising your hand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this QR codes that Natalia mentioned, because it happens that a colleague of mine, Dominik Czepigo, is just publishing as the editor, a book that is based on the oral history project that was conducted by the Carta Foundation like many years ago. That was the first oral history project I ever took part in, and it was devoted to conducting the interviews with the Poles that after the Second World War did not leave for the communist Poland, but stayed wherever they were in what is now Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, and so on. So after 15 years, the book is almost ready, and there are QR codes in the book. So the book is it is a collection of excerpts, pieces of interviews. So piece by piece, the stories are told, and you have QR codes that move you to the recording, so you can read, but you can also listen to. And I'm really looking forward to, because that's maybe not the first time the QR codes are used, but I think that's the first time they will be used in the scholarly book in Poland for such a scale. So it is a really promising way for bringing the stories to the wider public, because let us be honest, the wider public is not visiting the archives. The wider public usually need a graphic novel, a book, I don't know, a movie, something in the internet, pieces cut from the interviews. So it's a nice idea.
Possibly I will add, excuse me, Katerina. Firstly, Director Anna, I think that with casual people, so-called, better to use products to make their interest bigger. And it also helps that you control to which data they have access. And so you can not provide what is too sensitive and can harm people. From other side, I want to say, Natalia, relatives can be very cruel. I had examples of the interviews which were moved out from the usage because of relatives. So firstly it was given, and then because of relatives was moved out because of different reasons. And I don't know if it's a good idea. So they must know that it was given, and any assignments were made, but to propose them, especially to come to see once again, to have communication that can provoke that partly they will disagree with what was said with relative by their mothers, fathers. And very often people who are not researchers, they are not understanding what is method and why these transcripts are looking so as they look. And certainly it's a responsibility how to do these transcripts. They cannot be done automatically. And from other side, it must be a good written what you hide in these transcripts. And certainly it's a pity, but we are living in such situations that we must hide this voice, but in any case, we lose information which is connected with this, for example, feelings, other non-verbal things. And for me, is question if you foresee translation of transcripts also for promotion of these interviews. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can now quickly move to Katerina if you have a question, and then go back to our speaker to the question from Iryna about translating transcripts. So Katerina, please.
Really, all phenomenon interviews, oral history, our project is so complex phenomenon. We could speak about, especially only about transcription. It's very, very interesting point, and we have different experiences. We can speak about this. It would be very helpful, really, to collect question when what we have had now for the future discussion, because and in the future to be focused only on 2-3 points perhaps, because it's really complex phenomenon, our project. Like additional idea, what for the future, if we are focused more for the future, Luxembourg, our institute will have a lot project with voice museum, only voice museum, and perhaps it could be one possibility to put our interviews to this voice museum with special programs the voice, but to public to get access to listen the story, and perhaps to see transcript in museum like a book. So it could be one idea how to get access to the public for this information, like voice museum. And okay. I think it belongs not only for Ukraine. It all stories belongs to all people in the world. It is, I am really sure in my in my conception.
Okay, thank you, Katerina, for the comment. Indeed, the question of belonging is so very much problematic. Just to think how material objects get problematic in terms of inheritance sometimes and belonging, and not to speak about testimonies, which is even more complicated. So now back to the speakers, and if you could comment quickly, do you have any plans of translating? Have you had any previous experiences with translating transcripts for academic communication, for research papers, for promotional needs? There's so many issues, and as we know, the academic field operates in a way that major publications happen to be in English, and then we need to translate excerpts from the interview. So how do you see this process?
If I can start, I'm strongly against translating entire translation of the entire transcripts, because I have the feeling that if you want to work, if you are a researcher and you want to work with the sources, you need to know the language, and that's it. Of course, it does not mean that the content should be available only to people who know the language, because that would be very excluding. And this is, I mean, we want to bring the message to the wider public, because the Ukrainians know what's happening in Ukraine, and probably the French people do not. But I would really advocate for translating of the carefully chosen pieces, or rather for working towards the products. It was already mentioned that the products are much more I mean, effective and appropriate for the wider public. So yes, let's translate, let's bring the message to the wider foreign public, but I think that the simply the amount of resources that would be invested in translation of all these hours lasting interviews, it would be the waste of time and money.
Okay, thank you.
I think
Natalia?
I fully agree with Anya, but I can add also that we can translate abstracts. At least people know what we have. We can translate pieces of interviews, and it's actually something that we did. If I can use this space for advertising, we translated quotes from interviews from Euromaidan that we did 10 years ago. And this year we will have an anniversary of Euromaidan and Revolution of Dignity. And the Ukrainian Institute Lysa Krudnitsky program supported the way to translate 700 pages of quotes from the interviews, which are now available, organized into 17 categories. I'm not sure if it is precisely useful for researchers for the reasons Anya just mentioned, because we need the context, we need to know the language. But at the same time, I believe it's very important to use for educational purposes, for instance. In student room, it could be a very valuable resource. So if you teach the classes on protests or recent Ukrainian history, feel free to apply, and it's available online after registration. The procedure is not so rigid as the one that we want to develop, but still you have to apply and you will have a possibility to read these pieces online. And part also is available on educational platform. I think it's impossible to translate certain things, especially in this collection, especially when people switch between different language codes. People use surjek, something that you cannot really grasp unless you know the language. But at the same time, I think we have this wider question of how we can communicate this project. And disclosure of this collection as archive is just part of it. We have to think also about different ways how we can make these voices heard, thinking about the obligations that we have towards people with whom we talked. We wanted this collection to be visible. We wanted these voices and stories to be visible. And making archive accessible is just one part of this obligation. We can think about other ways, more public ways of thinking about visual novels, thinking about podcasts, thinking about different ways how these stories can live in a public realm. Also with respect to all of the challenges that we discussed for more than an hour and a half about safety and security and sensitivity, etc.
Yeah, podcast. That was my thought exactly, that this is a way to give voice. Podcasts are extremely popular these days, aren't they? So maybe that's a way to talk about, to present oral histories. I don't know, maybe. Iryna.
Yeah, I want to say several thoughts about, I translated and participated in translation of many fragments of interviews, beginning from my dissertation, also in different projects. Usually we do not need translation of the whole transcript, because it has no sense. For example, from the opinion that whole transcript is usually necessary for researcher better when he knows the language. Because translation is already interpretation, and also it's changed. It's much more higher level that it will be possibly something lost. And that's why it's the question how to deal with this. For example, I remember Shoah archive where they have indexes, and for people who are not sure with languages, it can be proposed that such transcript can be so-called segmented, and it will be written according to, in Belarusian Oral History Archive, we had 4 indexes, and you can also choose yourself, so thematical, geographical, chronological, and names. And so simply to put in English, for example, and it can attract attention of researchers who are not so sure with Ukrainian language, for example, and then they will try to translate it. We are living in present modern time where technologies helps us very easily to translate from different languages automatically. So when person will need exactly translation, certainly he can ask a specialist, but in general, even voice can be translated now, we know, from the technologies. And yeah, how it works, also example, it depends on the topic for whom it's important, who is goal group of the product. And I can mention from Belarusian Oral History Archives that we made such a compendium of fragments of interviews about first Soviets, about period between 1939 and 41. It was not about whole interviews, but about fragments from people who gave their interviews near the border, former Soviet-Polish border. And this topic was so important for Poland that it was translated in Polish language. And as I know, it's interesting product for people who are interested in this part of story.
Okay. Thank you very much, Iryna, for your comment. And thank you very much for participating in today's seminar. Of course, we're not going to exhaust all the topics related to sensitive data, how to and when to disclose, how to satisfy the needs of all parties involved in the process, but I think we discussed a lot. Just a short reminder, this meeting has been recorded and will be soon available on YouTube of the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences. So please visit the YouTube channel to check when it will be made available. So once again, thank you so much for coming to listen to us today. Thank you to once again to Iryna Kashtalian, Natalia Otrishchenko, and Anna Wylegała for being our speakers today. And probably next seminars are going to appear very soon. So please look out for them as well. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for moderating.
Yeah,
Thank you, Gosho.
Thank you, Małgorzata.